Fantastic. All right, I'll put in those things later. Want to know the realities of politics and politicking? Keen on hearing from two people who come from different sides of the political divide. Want to get inside views on how things could pan out from two very experienced campaigners? Then stay tuned. Welcome to Northern Vibe. Thanks for tuning in. If we've never met, I'm Matt Maloney, host and founder of Northern Vibe. We're about sharing stories. This is where discussions are held with interesting, informed people to gain their perspective on a new state and indeed any other issues that attract curiosity. Every Wednesday, my colleague David Young does an excellent podcast on Podbean, Yes to a North Queensland State, Wednesday nights between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. Get the Podbean app, have a listen. Also, there's another really interesting online talkback show called High Humidity with Nettie and Bunny. Search them on Facebook and tune in. For this episode, we've been lucky enough to secure the distinguished John Mickel and Jason Costigan, who was the force of nature in an open-ended discussion around how things could pan out on this election and how achievable a new state is. The election is set for the 31st of November, which is All Saints' Eve. And I'm thinking there's going to be a couple of nightmares that night and quite a few lost spirits that evening. Now, both my guests are men who have worked hard. They fought for what they believed, and they have achieved office. Reginald John Mickel was born in Mergen, August of 1953, making him 67 years young. Educated at St James and St Lawrence's, he completed a diploma of teaching, worked as a teacher, and then got involved in union politics. He was an advisor to federal MP David Bettle, senior advisors to Wayne Goss and Peter Beattie. In 1998, he was elected to the state legislature as the member for Logan. At various times, he was the Minister for Environment, Energy, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, State Development, Transport, Trade, Employment, and indeed Industrial Relations. He held 7 portfolios in 5 years. I wonder if Russ Hiddens held that many ministries. He was elected Speaker in 2009, demonstrating the respect that he held across the benches. He did not contest the 2012 election and became a media commentator on public affairs. He's much sought after by the media. He went into a consultancy, forming his own company, which assisted companies and organisations to engage with governments at all levels. He moved on to Rowland, a strategic communications and creative agency. Then he gave back working for Access Community Services. He is also an adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology, Gardens Point campus, where he occasionally lectures in public policy. Married with 3 children, the Honourable John Mickel. Mr. Fix-It, welcome.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be with you.
Thank you, sir. David Young's podcast guest on the July the 16th of this year was a thoughtful and articulate chap. This guest congratulated Brisbane on getting out and arguing for ideas. This guest said, what is missing in Australian politics? People with passion, who want to argue for an idea. Well, this pretty much describes my other guest, whom I was lucky enough to host here on the 27th of July. That was my second podcast ever. Jason Costigan. Jason is a force of nature. Prior to getting into politics, he also called the footy, and listening to Costo, you can hear the Queensland lilt. When he gave his maiden speech in the 54th Parliament, you could smell the wattle, you could taste the eucalyptus. Now, as an interesting aside, he had a relative who was on the ill-fated Kennedy expedition. That's something I didn't know until very recently. He's the son of a single parent and educated by the excellent Sisters of Mercy. God bless them. Some people seek football, others have football thrust upon them. And Jason had that thrust upon him by Nanny Mackenzie. It led to a long and fruitful career calling the greatest game. He went into journalism, working in the Bowen Independent. This set him up to argue passionately for ideas, people, and places. Costa, how are you going?
Matt, good evening to you. Good evening to Adjunct Professor Mickel. Nice to be back with you on Northern Vibe. Good evening, everybody, especially those people across North Queensland.
We really, really appreciate your time, both of you gentlemen. It's sincerely an honour to have both of you here. I kind of get fanboy about both of you. But look, before we start the discussion, to our ever-expanding base of listeners, please like and share. This is very important. We are growing exponentially, actually, and I'm really, really happy with the numbers that continue to grow. But we need your help to keep up momentum. Now, we're getting some really interesting locations as to where people are listening from. So tell us where you're from, ask a question, please make some comments. We're also getting some great suggestions in regards to questions to ask, issues to cover off on the comments page. And this includes guests, incidentally. I've had some magnificent suggestions for guests, taking them very seriously. If you want to come on Northern Vibe, please nominate yourself. As a bit of a teaser, our guests next week are the young IPA podcasters, James Bolt and Peter Gregory, who hold the Voice of Freedom IPA podcast. Make sure you tune in for that. Now, another thing we do is every week we have a mention in dispatches. Now, this week, my shout out goes to the Cairns and District Islamic Cultural and Building Trust. G'day and salams to Iman Dr. Zia and Iman Wasim, Zaloof, Farah and Javed. Big g'days to you all, and I'm quite confident you'll be tuned in tonight. Now, I'm not a Muslim, but I've had a lot to do with the Islamic community here in Cairns. They do great work, both within and outside of the Islamic community. They live their faith by helping the sick and the poor. If you want to support them, if you Google Cairns Mosque, it will come up. Jump on the website. Definitely worth a look. Now, diving right in, what do we mean by a new state? For viewers and those unfamiliar with the details, please get on the Boot Brisbane website. You'll find details of breakdowns of facts and figures, as well as interviews with leading experts in the fields of constitutional law. We've had Professor David Flint on there. We've got interviews with economists and demographers. Bernard Salt, another chap I'm a great fanboy of, has been very, very generous with his time. Right now, we are unashamed new state advocates, but we are growing and we are developing. In the very near future, starting soon after the election, we're going to be having another podcast just on people, places, events, and interesting organisations. So do keep an eye on Northern Vibe. Now, I normally do some small talk, but I'm just so excited by this meeting of minds that we have the opportunity to hear Mr. Fix-It chat with Mr. Force of Nature. Reason and Passion, one is tempted to make the observation. Id and the superego, there are so many yin and yang. So I'm going to dive right in. Now, I'm going to make an observation just to frame two questions, and I'll get John to answer first and then Jason. Now, the first observation, LNP and Labor are now struggling to achieve 70% of the primary vote, with more than 30% of the primary vote being taken by minor parties like NQ First, Katters, One Nation and the Greens. In 2017, there were 27 seats where minor parties finished in the first top two choices by voters. There were 12 seats where the contest was between Labor and One Nation, and another 8 in which the LNP was up against One Nation, with Labor finishing third. There are seats where the competition is between Labor and the Greens. Surprisingly, there's even seats between the LNP and the Greens, which just goes to show one can never really categorise. Now, for the forthcoming election, I suspect for many seats, the competition will be between NQ First, the Katters and One Nation, with major parties further down the returns paper. Now, in my mind, this demonstrates just how relevant minor parties, I'm going to use the inverted commas, minor parties are. So question one, and again, this is to the former speaker, just how meaningful are polls on preferred parties and leaders that assume that all minor parties finish third when they don't?
Well, they're meaningless. And I'm on the record as saying that. What you tend to get in the major daily newspapers is a poll that says, two-party preferred, the LNP's this and Labor's that. Now, clearly, in large pockets of Queensland, that is just simply not true. You mentioned in your introduction to the question that 3 seats are held by the KAP. 1 seat is held by One Nation, which means they attracted more than the 5% or whatever it is that the statewide polls indicate they're getting. You're quite right when you say that not every seat is a contest between the LNP and Labor. They're not. 66 out of 93 are, but the rest aren't. And so a statewide poll that doesn't take that into account is essentially meaningless. And so I understand why news organisations do it the way they do it. It's cheaper and they're cash strapped the same as everybody else is. But essentially, those polls are meaningless.
Thank you very much. Jason, really want your input on this. You've formed a new party. You're an experienced member of Parliament yourself. Very, very keen to hear your point.
Well, I was very, very keen, Matt, to hear what Adjunct Professor Mickel had to say there, because his experience and knowledge and interpreting the data, the statistics, the polling is as good as anyone in domestic politics in on the state scene in Queensland. And I'm trying to fill up John's pockets here, but people across the political divide will tell you that. People who've been eminently qualified and then some have been around a lot longer than I have. So it's interesting to hear what John had to say. I was listening very intently there. These statewide polls, they are a relic from yesteryear. And I think what John said about the media companies, and that's where I started my career with News Corp. They used to have cash to burn, didn't they, John? But they don't have it anymore. And so
that's right, rivers of gold in the advertising. But it's not
rivers of gold. Reminds me of the Bowen Basin, John. I'll come to that later. But it's just not like it used to be. And when you're going through those stats, 2/3 of the contests are between the traditional enemies, but 1/3 is not. And I think as time moves on, we'll move away from these statewide polls, I think, John, and go to more like regional polls. And I think that will shine a light as to what's happening across, say, far North Queensland, North Queensland, Central Queensland, where there is movement at the station, if I could sound a little bit like CJ Dennis or whoever tonight. But this one size fits all, this statewide poll thing, it's a hangover of the past when Brisbane had 3 or 4 newspapers, and the media world has changed amazingly. In my own time, in my own career, starting on typewriters in the Whitsundays with News Corp, it's a whole new world out there, and so in certain seats, it'll be one of the minor parties versus one of the majors. And there's plenty of examples there, and I think John summed it up well with some of those statistics there, where it's not the traditional in the blue corner is X and in the red corner is Y. That stuff has gone out the window some time ago.
I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is that excellent suggestion of regional polls. I think if we could get the media to do that, that would be outstanding. So you could do a far North Queensland one, a North Queensland one, and a Central Queensland one. That would have more meaning. But it is what it is. The media companies don't like me saying that their polls are meaningless in Queensland, but I call it as I see it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's happened in recent years, of course, and let's not sugarcoat this, John, as you know, even in a short period of time, this is my 3rd term in the Parliament, and your career didn't overlap with mine, your illustrious career. I never was up the front of the train like you were, and those lofty heights of serving the people, including the wonderful and cherished role of Speaker, privileged role of Speaker of the Parliament. But we've lost our newspapers in so many communities, and it did get a lot of oxygen, a lot of commentary going back a few months ago. I take my hat off to people like Derek Barry at the Northwest Star and Cole Jackson in Longreach. I was talking to one of his journos today out of the Central Highlands. It's a real shame because, the microscope that the local media used to play and putting it on the local politicians and political wannabes, that has by and large dried up, and it's a whole new world out there. And I like the idea of the regional polls. And I know that if I wasn't in this job and I was looking after News Corp in regional Queensland, I'd be saying at the Cairns Post and Townsville Bulletin, we need to do stuff like this because our readers want to see it and there's value in it. Yes, of course it costs money, and it's a tricky world out there with declining advertising revenues and so forth. It's no secret that that's the case.
Absolutely. If I can kind of add to that, an interesting dynamic. I am acquainted with Mr. Barry out at Mount Isa, and I had a very interesting conversation to him in regards to how media is going to go. And he believes that there is probably going to be a breakup, and he doesn't know precisely what form it's going to take, whether it's going to mean smaller local newspapers or social media like Northern Vibe and other organisations like the places I've been taking up that slack. And we live in interesting times, to quote the Chinese phrase. But look, following on, I'm sure the major parties are actually aware of this. Now, I really want to throw out another question. Does this dynamic give the two major parties motivation to keep what I believe is the undemocratic critical mass, the control through the undemocratic critical mass of electorates in the southeast corner, because it rigs the system kind of in favour of themselves. This time I'll get Jason to go first, and then I'll get John to go second.
Well, mate, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but I'm genuinely interested to hear what John Mickel has to say here, because it's no secret that I'm not with one of the major parties, but I was, and now I head up a new party, which is facing our first electoral test ever next month in the Queensland state election. On the back of a pandemic, just to make it a little bit more interesting for everybody out there, no matter who you're cheering for. You know, I do want to see North Queensland break away from the rest of the state. I think the system's broken in that we've seen this migration into southeast Queensland with people turning up from interstate, turning up from overseas, and turning up from regional and rural Queensland, piling into that corner between Noosa and Coolangatta. And as John knows only too well, redistribution after redistribution, we're just going to have less and less representation for North and Far North Queensland. Geographically, my electorate has never been smaller. John will remember people that go back to, you know, the early days of Whitsunday and the electorates of Bowen and Peak Downs. There's been many a seat abolished. I don't see it getting any better for North, Central and Far North Queensland. So just summing up, you know, we are very much all the way here in terms of pushing ahead with separation. It's just the system's going to be broken here. It's not going to get better. We're going to have bigger electorates, less representation. And the next redistribution, you know, maybe they'll wipe out the seat of Hinchinbrook and it'll get rolled into Hill and they'll call it Cassowary Coast or Tropical Coast. And that's one less MP for the North, Far North. It might be a member of my team, but I don't think that's great for democracy. And I don't think that's great for North and Far North Queensland, John.
Hello. Okay. Got it.
Not sure if John's with us. You there, John?
Yeah, I am. I was just waiting for Matt.
Oh no, please go right into it. This is about you, not me.
Yeah, okay. A couple of points I'd make. Firstly, there are two electoral contests going on at the moment that are worthy of study, and they couldn't be more different. One is for the presidency and the Congress of the United States, and one in Queensland. Which one is fairer? There's not a shadow of a doubt that the one in Queensland is fairer, and I'll explain why. In the United States, they don't have a national system of voting. They have a county system of voting. In the United States, the boundaries are drawn up by the state politicians for the National Congress. Ours is drawn up independently by an electoral commission. If I have a fault at all with what government has done in recent times, and I am critical of it, it is this, that the number of seats has not followed the population increase. And that's because governments of all persuasions are terrified that they're going to create more politicians. But the public has been poorly served by that system. There wasn't a change in the number of seats in this state for 31 years, from 1986 to 2017. The loser of that was people in regional and Far North Queensland, because what has happened is that the seats have got larger, and they've got larger because the population has increased. Population increase is a good thing. But if you don't, and even then, the enlargement of the parliament was just modest last time. There's now 93 seats. We don't have an upper house. So when people make the comparison with the Queensland Parliament and they look at the lower house, they don't think that in New South Wales and all the other states there's an upper house. I'm not advocating an upper house by any means. I'm just simply saying that the population has massively increased in 31 years. The number of seats have not. It's not true to say that there has been a corruption of that. No, it is actually fairer than it's ever been, because these things are drawn up independently within a tolerance of plus 10 or minus 10%. The seat I first got elected to, the seat of Logan, had in those days 28,000 people. And that was significantly higher than a smaller seat. I never felt that my people in Logan were worth half as much as everybody else, but I wasn't stupid enough either to believe that somebody in rural and regional Queensland shouldn't have more ability to service their electorate than me. So I never had an issue with people getting more aeroplane flights, more electorate offices, more cars, if that's what it needed to service the electorate. Now, in terms of the major parties, it is simply untrue that the major parties have got this, have locked everybody out. There are now more minor parties than at any time I can recall. And those minor parties are in North and Far North Queensland. We know that. But they are also in Southeast Queensland. We've got an independent in Noosa, and we've got a Green candidate, member rather, in the inner city of Brisbane. Now, they're all from a minor party, and they are able to break through because of that fact that we're in Matt's introduction, that the major parties are struggling to get 70% of the vote. And where they struggle to get that, there is always an opportunity for a well-known independent to come through. That's exactly what happened in Noosa. And my guess is that will happen again in some other seat this time in the state election, which is on the 31st of October. So a couple of things. We've got an independent electoral commission process, but the biggest weakness is this, that the number of parliamentarians has not moved in proportion to the population increase.
Okay. I'm going to go a little bit off script here and ask another question. I really want Jason's comments on that. But I don't know whether or not you're going to agree on this, John, but do you think that...
No, it's not a mutual agreement exercise.
Yeah, it's not a love fest. No, it's not a love fest.
We can get the gloves off. We can get the gloves off when required.
Yeah. Yes, well, Jason. Yeah, I'm very well aware that you can, believe me. And I'm looking forward to this respectful debate. And does the two-party system that we have here in Australia, does this distort democracy? Would be the question I'd ask you.
Well, I think John's alluding to the fact that we don't have a two-party system anymore because they're not dominating like they used to, and I think that's a good thing. You know, I'm a proud conservative. I'm more conservative than the LNP. They don't like hearing that, but I'll make a point here on your program tonight. There are 6 Conservative MPs in the Queensland Parliament north of Bundaberg. There's only one with the LNP. So, you know, I think my concern is the pile up of people, the population drift from the bush into that southeast corner, the international arrivals, interstate arrivals over the last, generation, piling in between Noosa and Coolangatta. That's been unhealthy, not real good for regional Queensland. No matter who you're cheering for, whether you despise me, like me, the other minor party people, it's not real good. And that's why there's this anger out there, I suspect. Not only frustration, but anger in the community in relation to services or the loss of services, government services, but also in the private sector. You know, if it's the agricultural college being shut down in Longreach, that is a killer blow to the Central West. If it's the bank, the ANZ, that reopens after Cyclone Debbie and Proserpine on the coast in my electorate, and then just 3 years later, walks out of town, as it will next month, again, that's another kick in the guts for this community that I represent. So government can't fix all these things alone, but government does need to have a good look in the mirror as to what it's doing, because I don't think it's healthy for our state, and I don't think it's been healthy for our state or for the nation that we have so many millions of Australians living within an hour or so of our capital cities. I think that's bollocks. I don't think it does anything in terms of quality of life. I don't think it does a lot for productivity and generating wealth for the nation. We could be a much wealthier nation, a richer nation, not just in dollars and cents, but in terms of what's in our ticker and in our minds. But we're missing out, and I think government policy has failed. For example, I don't want to get into it now, but I'm going to put it on the table. They've been talking about building dams for how long, and how long have we waiting? And I'll be blunt. My old mob, they love a feasibility study. Now, Dr. Peter Delamoth came into the Parliament well before Adjunct Professor Mickel. He was the longest serving Attorney General and Minister for Justice, as I recall, in Queensland political history. He wanted the Urana Dam built in the Burdekin catchment. He championed the cause for years. The feasibility studies go back to the early 60s. They're still working on it now. And in fact, I'll be political, real hard-nosed here, Matt. The current opposition leader, her husband's working on the latest one. Now, I just think that's bollocks. We're not getting things done like we used to. No one wants to do things like Snowy Hydro, Bradfield scheme, or even a smaller version of it. And we've lost our way, and we've got all these Australians piling in close to our capital cities. I don't think that's healthy for the nation, and it's certainly not healthy for regional Queensland.
Yeah, and I had a very quick conversation with John just before you came on. And John, I understand that you're actually not pro a new state, which I respect. I totally respect that. And again, I do hope that seriously.
It's true. It's true to say that when I was asked to do this, I was just asked to comment on it. In my position as a commentator, I won't take sides on it. It's just that simple.
Okay.
I'll give you the mechanisms on how you might go about achieving it. Your question was, are the two major parties? I'm sorry. The question again was are the two major parties doing what?
Distorting democracy. I'm kind of concerned about that. I believe it's a dynamic that's affecting the way that our democratic process works.
Well, if it was just the two major parties, you'd say yes, but demonstrably there are more minor parties now. And if you look at New South Wales, there's a presence in the lower house of more minor parties than I think than they've ever had. Yep. And if you look at the voting system in the upper houses in the other states, the minor parties are elected in proportion. Now, you could change the voting system here, but I haven't heard anybody advocate that tonight. The voting system, I think, was changed in a process that I was critical of the government for doing. I think there should have been far more consultation when they changed the voting system. However, the current compulsory preferential voting system enables all those groupings of people to have an influence in ultimately who the candidate is. The voting system did not stop three catters being elected, a One Nation person being elected, a Green being elected, an Independent being elected. It has not stopped in this election a plethora of minor parties coming forward, from the UAP, the Animal Justice Party. I'm sorry if I offend because I don't know the name properly, but the Anti-Vaxxers Party. There's a whole raft of them coming forward. And I am on the record as encouraging people to stand. The great offence I find with our democratic system of voting is that the people who complain and say none of them are any good, and yet if Jason has 5 candidates against him, that will be big. If he has 10, that would be huge. In other words, there's a job going on the 31st of October. A job has to be filled. And yet there are 10 applicants for it? How would that square if there was a job going at Woolies or Coles or Aldi or somewhere? You'd only get 10? I don't think so. You get hundreds in some places. So our democratic system is better served, far better served, if people have a grievance. The 31st of October is the time to put that grievance forward by either standing yourselves or getting behind, as the new state people are doing, behind people who support that cause. That's real democracy. Democracy is having the voice heard and the vote. What I find and always found tremendously disappointing in my own seat, there was a job going at Woolies, I recall it very clearly, at Browns Plains. They had 300 line up for it, 300. There was a job going as the member for Logan. We had 4, and 3 of them didn't live in the seat.
That's a lot of parachuting, John.
Well, you know, you have a look around at, I'm not sure at the people who are opposing you. It's not my job tonight to either boost them or run them down. But if you get 10 in that field, Jason, against you, that will be massive. And yet it's a job going. There's a lot of people would say that Jason's job is too well paid. I'm not one of those. I think when you look at the number of hours you work and all that sort of thing, if you're working in another field, you probably get a damn sight more money. But I always just find it passing strange that the people who are political practitioners are criticised, and yet when it comes down to wanting to put your name down to seek that job, there are far fewer applicants than would put their name down for any job in Proserpine or Airlie Beach or wherever it might be.
May I make a point, and perhaps it's something I kind of wouldn't mind discussing. I think part of the reason that happens, that, you know, I've had many people kind of say to me, "Well, politics matters. It's a bit of a mugs game." I think part of the reason that it happens is because there is, respectfully, sir, there is a critical mass of electorates in the southeast corner. So if you're running as a representative for, say, Cairns or one of the seats here in North Queensland, now it doesn't matter how persuasive you are as an individual. And indeed, even if all the other representatives out of the 250 kilometre radius of Brisbane in the southeast corner decided to unite across party lines and vote as a regional bloc and say, well, you know, these are the things that concern us as regional people, your voice is absolutely, utterly meaningless because there's 20 of you against 73. Now, one of the little slogans that we have is in Boot Brisbane, and we use it as a joke, but we're serious about it, is you and me without the 73. Now, the great thing about what we're doing in Boot Brisbane is, you know, we're engaging people across the political spectrum. We've been lucky enough to speak to a number of Indigenous people, a whole bunch of independent candidates as well, and indeed people who are quite left-wing. I was lucky enough to speak to Rob Pine, really enjoyed that conversation. And I'm aiming to get a couple of Greens on as well. And what I want from them is to understand that it's not about whatever it is particular policy. It's about you and me without the 73. Being able to sit down together as people and go, hey, look, these are the issues that concern us. We're all living in the same area. We're all feeling the same sort of things. Yes, we have different political viewpoints. Yes, we have different worldviews. But without adequate representation, it's kind of meaningless. And I mean no disrespect to whomever is sitting in any seat. But right now, if I go down to my local member of parliament, he or she is going to explain to me why the people in Brisbane can't accept it. Why it's just not economically, it's just not politically feasible. What matters is not what I think. I don't really have control. Do I have a representative in parliament, sir? Yes, I do. Does that person have a real voice? No, they don't. There is a critical mass of electorates down in the southeast corner. They're broadly linked by identity. And I understand, and I totally respect everything you just said. You know, I listened very carefully to what you said. Yes, I get there's a bunch of minor parties down there, but we have a different identity up here. We do things a little bit differently. We have a different hierarchy of concerns. And I genuinely feel, and I mean this with the greatest of respect, sir, I feel like I'm being ruled by Brisbane. That's why I'm here. I suspect that's why Jason I know that's why Jason has written this policy on these sorts of issues. And I really believe, like, I'm not joking when I say that the 73 electorates in the southeast corner are distorting democracy. It's like a black hole, sir. It's distorting political time space. And I really don't see any other alternative other than, and I know you don't want to weigh in each way because, you know, you're a person who's about debate and discussion. Really respect that. Believe me, I respect you seriously. I've been researching you a lot recently, and I'm almost as big a fanboy as Jason. You know, we heard him speaking very respectfully about you earlier, but I think you're wrong. I don't see any other way other than the formation of a new state to fix this imbalance.
Well, do you want me to answer that? Or,
yes, please, sir. That's the entire point of this discussion.
Yeah, the point is if people in far North Queensland feel that way, then they need to seek people who are going to speak out for the North. Let me speak federally then. Tasmania is allowed 5 seats, 5 in the House of Representatives. It shouldn't have anything near that number, but it's allowed 5. Tasmania has always produced parliamentarians who speak out for Tasmania. Senator Brian Harradine was probably the best known of them. Some of the other states, Western Australia and South Australia, are classics. When Western Australia had an issue with its GST, what you found there was people from both sides of politics, in fact all sides, spoke out in favour of the state of Western Australia. It is similar with South Australia. If you go to South Australia, the South Australian politicians from both sides will unashamedly speak out for South Australia. If you said, what's your evidence of that? Have a look at that shipbuilding thing that's going on. Yeah. What, you really believe that could go on in far North Queensland? You've got to be kidding me. Yeah. Have a look at the undying defence of things like Santos. The point is that for some reason in Queensland, we've never had the majority view to get up and do something about some of the issues that Jason has spoken about. I could wax lyrical about some of the issues in southeast Queensland. That's not the purpose of tonight's exercise. I will say this, I've never known it, that the majors and the minors get together around a single issue, a pro-Queensland issue, in the same way that the Tasmanian senators, West Australian senators and House of Representatives members did, and South Australia in defence of their state. Now, I don't see that as a corruption. I see that as a need to get people who are going to forcefully speak out for the region. And if that's what's lacking, then the 31st of October is the time to fix that.
Jason?
Well, it's interesting as Adjunct Professor Mickel took us across some of the other states. And of course, I remind everybody that Queensland historically the most decentralised state in the Federation. And having said that, how times have changed. We'll go back to what I said earlier about the pile-on effect with so many people nowadays living in that southeast corner between Noosa and Coolangatta, and the disconnect, the utter disconnect between that part of the state of Queensland and Camberwell, Cannonvale, Cloncurry, up the Cape. That's like, it's a big state, isn't it? And I think as time has moved on, more and more people are jack of it. And no matter who they vote for, whether they vote left or right, they are jack of that. And they are not happy. You said something before about, Matt, about feeling that you're ruled from Brisbane. Well, the more and more people I speak to, no matter who they vote for me, whether they like me or not, that's purely academic. But they do not like this concept of Brisbane knows best. They are jack of it. And I think that is not going to go away anytime soon.
And sir, you know, I feel funny using your first name. You've probably picked that up. I'm sorry to sort of sound like that, but just the way I've been trained, and you know, my father's very big on the use of titles, and I kind of feel funny using your first name. So if you're here, sir, I'm speaking to you. So I don't see any other way of fixing this other than a new state, and it's because of that critical mass. You know, I totally get what you were saying, and I'm not defending Joe Bjelke-Petersen's gerrymander. I'm going to repeat that. I am not defending Joe Bjelke-Petersen's gerrymander, but I could totally see why that kind of happened, because he recognised the issue that we're kind of with now. It's like, well, hang on, we've got this, we got the Prater, and there's nothing sinister going on here. We've simply got, you know, the Matthew principle, if you want to call it that, the greatest going to the one that already has the most. You know, that's from New Testament, and that's something that happens with gravity. That's a recognition. That's a recognition of reality. It's only going to get worse. There's going to be more seats in the southeast corner. Let me articulate it this way for you, sir. You're standing for you want to become the member of Milton. I won't say Logan. You want to become the member of Milton. Is the member for Milton going to stand up and say, look, if you elect me as the member for Milton, I promise you the good people of North Queensland are going to be able to keep their money. They're going to be able to build the hospitals they want to build. They're going to be able to put in the roads that they want to put in.
And get as much Forex as they want.
Get as much Forex as they want. You know, whatever it is issue, you know, kill the crocodiles or whatever it is. And I'm not saying that should or shouldn't happen.
It should happen, Matt, and you know it.
I got some. Yeah, well, I got some funny. We'll discuss.
John, we're not talking about the two-legged crocodiles in George Street either.
But see, it doesn't matter which specific issue it is, because you have fundamentally the decisions being made in an urban area with people with urban values, and indeed, the people of Brisbane have more in common with Sydney, Melbourne, and look, you could take someone from inner city Brisbane, drop them off in London, drop them off in New York, and those people, they're going to have more in common with them than they are with me. And that's kind of like strange. Look, let me put this in a way, because this was going to lead into one of the questions I was going to ask you further down. Oh my God, we've been going for 48 minutes and I haven't even really asked 3 questions. But so you had a lot of dealings with Mr. Watson. And one of the questions I was going to ask you was, well, how representative is he of Indigenous people? Well, I spoke to Des, who is one of the NQ First candidates. Fantastic conversation I had with him, all but short, because we had some massive technical issues, and they weren't all my fault, incidentally. And I also spoke to an independent candidate, a very articulate woman, Yodi Batsky. And very quickly, sir, I started to understand that people talk about this racial divide. And I'm not saying there's any distinctions between, different racial groups, despite the fact that I'm mixed race myself. I get that, but I hold more in common with Yodi and Des simply because I'm in far north Queensland. We're dealing with these same sorts of issues. And I would suggest that this is going to be controversial and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I probably have a greater understanding of Cape Indigenous issues than an Indigenous person in Southeast Queensland. And that's because I live here, and that's because I've had a lot of dealings with that. And it's because well,
you're connected, Matt, you're connected. Let's cut to the chase.
What we all are, and this strange idea that there's this Indigenous, like any race. Let's stop talking about Indigenous. That any race has some sort of racial national consciousness. Well, there were people talking about that in the 30s in Germany. We're people. So, John, that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Well, Matt, I'd like to hear what John's got to say, because he used to be the Minister of the Crown, responsible for our First Nations people.
Yeah,
what's your take on that, John?
Yes, sir. That's what I was going to ask you.
It doesn't surprise me that coming from far north Queensland, you and Des would have a lot in common. That doesn't surprise me at all. Whereas you referred to the late Sam Watson, I think it was.
Yeah.
Was that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, he was from inner city Brisbane. And the issues that he would have been on about essentially were far more urban issues than someone like Desmond Taylor, who was, I think, from memory, the mayor of Wudjil at one stage. So it doesn't surprise me at all that those issues were vastly different. The issues that Desmond was on about were trying to seek, or the community was trying to seek, a police station, as I recall, and the rest of it would have been roads, making sure the schools were okay, the access to health services. Those things were vastly different from what Sam Watson was advocating in inner city Brisbane, where all those things had been developed and well developed for quite some time.
But the point,
so yes, the emphases
Sorry. The point being was that he was considered by the people of Brisbane as a spokesperson for Indigenous people. And like, okay, now I totally respect that the dynamics were very different back then. Like, you know, we didn't have the media, we didn't have anything else like. So the media is looking for someone that they can speak to get an idea. So, you know, I understand.
Proximity.
Yeah.
No,
I get that.
As you know from being in the media, it's proximity. Now, as to leaders, I won't comment on that because it's not fair. He's not here to argue his case.
No, and he's not. No, sir.
I'll leave it at that. He wasn't somebody I necessarily turned to as a representative of everybody in Queensland, if I can use that.
Yeah.
When I met with Des, and I'm pleased my memory's not that good, but when I went to Wudjil, I would have treated those as a discrete community. And because their issues there were different from, say, someone on Palm Island, for example, and that was different again from Doomadgee or wherever it might be, because proximity issues, access issues were all different from what some Aboriginal spokesmen in Brisbane would have been on about. And can I say this, that the issues that Desmond would be on about are vastly different from what people in regional and rural Queensland and Western Queensland were about. Mm-hmm. So it's not true that everyone was, if you will, the same. The issues were different.
Mm. Yeah, I get that, and this is such a delicate issue, and I really want to articulate my thoughts. And firstly, I've got to recognise that although that
I mean, you introduced the Muslim community in Cairns.
Yeah.
I have, through the work at Access, I have a lot to do with the various communities of different cultures in Brisbane, indeed in my own electorate. And I dare say that the issues in and around religious issues in parts of Brisbane are way different from what's going on in Cairns. And can I say, in Logan, it would have been way different than what was going on, for example, in Holland Park. Same religion, different issues.
I feel like we're talking in circles because, like, I agree with you, but none of those things are the problem. The problem is we have this, again, I keep coming back to this, sir. I cannot see any other way. And believe me, like,
right. Let's just deal then in how we might advance the issue.
Yes, sir.
So Jason's on board with a new state. So what we've got to do then, in a practical sense, is convince the Parliament to support Jason's idea.
That's the first... John, it's not just my idea, of course. I'm just one of the flag bearers, if I could just jump in there.
No. But I'm personalising because you're Queensland first. That's great. And that's your platform. So how can you parley that platform into acceptance?
Well, we need people elected. We need people elected to the Parliament like Desmond Taylor, and that's a no-brainer, isn't it?
What you'll do,
I need some mates. I need some mates in the Parliament.
That's it. You got it. Got it in one. So if enough people are attracted to that idea, and you have a balance of power situation, you're in a far better position to be able to parley that. And that's the strength of the parliamentary system. Because what is happening these days, and you've seen it yourself in the parliaments you've been in, sure, it was lopsided 2012, 2015, but that was not the case 2015 to 2017, where it was a minority, and where you've got to sit down with a whole bunch of groups and negotiate your way around that. In my time, there have been more minority parliaments than I think, in the previous 100 years of the Queensland Parliament. That is, from 1995, there was a minority, 1996, there was a minority, 1998, there was a minority. Then it got lopsided, and the next minority government was 2015. What I'm saying to you is that the occurrence of it is more now than it ever has been.
Well, I think minority government's here to stay for a long time.
Parliaments from that's the European experience as well, Jason. No doubt about it. So the issue is if Jason's idea has enough merit, and the frustration that I'm hearing from both of you tonight is mirrored in the electorates, then they will be successful. And if they are successful, they can parley that platform and get the Parliament to get on side and vote for that idea. And so representative democracy.
May I jump in and ask a question?
And I'm not advocating a vote for Jason or anything like that. I'm just saying, if enough listeners tonight like Jason's idea, then you've got to put his representatives in. And once you've got that, then you can parlay it. And if they're a majority, guess what? Away it goes.
I want to ask John this. We announced our separation policy on the shores of Cleveland Bay at the start of the week, or last week, I should say. Whether John likes the idea. What about the name, the Reef State, John? The Reef State, connecting central, north and far north Queensland. We'll take the whole reef with us.
I'm absolutely agnostic on names. I'm just
come on, sir. You've been speaking for too long, sir.
John, can I tell you, if I was calling the football on Fox Sports, I'd say, Mickel, have a look at him. He's got splinters.
That's it.
Obviously,
and you'd be accurate. But I'm just saying, if you want to get your platform, that's the way you do it. And I gave you a idea, and you parlayed that into action. That's the way it's done.
So, sir, you've been speaker for a very long time, clearly, but I'll throw this out there. All right, scenario: hung Parliament, all of the electorates outside of the southeast corner block fall to NQ first, or fall to other minor parties that are serious about a new state. They walk into Parliament and go, "We want to split the state." The 73 go, "No." And why would they? Because economically, we're kind of like supporting them. It means no new, again, to go back to the member of Milton. The member of Milton can no longer get up and so say, "If you vote for me, I promise you there's going to be a new pedestrian bridge here, there's going to be a new here, there's going to be new this." Because they're kind of doing that with our money.
Well, they're sucking office, Matt. They're sucking office, and it has to be said. It's got to be said.
And Mr. Mickel, sir, I know you're a deep believer in democracy. I get this, and you and I, this is why we're talking in circles. We're agreeing, no taxation without representation or adequate representation, because I'm not implying that we have no representation, sir. That is not my argument. But again, I cannot solve problems with a member of Parliament because I feel, and this is no disrespect to whomever is in, through this and through some other activities, I know a lot of, I'm acquainted with pretty much all of our elected representatives now. I know quite a few former elected representatives who speak candidly with me. And they fundamentally say two things. One, you've got a point. There is a critical mass of electorates in Brisbane. When you combine that with a party system, so and most of them are members of, not all, but most of them are members of major parties. They come and say, "We want to do this." And they go, "You know what? That's not acceptable for the 73 in the southeast corner. That doesn't run with us. You're going to say this." Well, fundamentally, that means that those people no longer are our representatives in the Parliament down in Brisbane. And democracy matters to me, sir. I'm not, I'm no anarchist, believe me. I'm not arguing against democracy.
Matt, you block supply until they do it.
Well, okay, let's frame this because
you'd love to see that. I think Adjunct Professor Mickel would love to see that stunt pulled on, wouldn't you?
Well,
giving you heart palpitations now, sir.
No, not
oh God!
I think John wants to go to a commercial break.
No, not at all. Look, when Peter Wellington was asked what he wanted for government, what he argued for from Peter Beattie at the time was he wanted country cabinet meetings. He wanted a process where the Parliament met once a term outside of Brisbane and in the regions, but he also wanted a process of country cabinets. Now, I was a participant in every one of those. I won't make comment on them. I simply say this, that was the price he demanded for government. Liz Cunningham, when she wanted support from the Borbidge government, argued for her country hospital.
That's right.
If you remember that. My point is that if you're the position, Jason, of being a kingmaker, your price for signing up to one side or the other, because at the end of the process, you've got to have a government. But if the price of that they deem to be, let's put this to a vote in the Parliament because that's what you demand, then that's the price, because they can't get it. It's not a matter of 73. The maths are wrong in that. The vital number is 47.
Well said, John. Well said. Yeah. I don't dispute that.
And so for Deb Frecklington to become government, I know the LNP are saying that they need 9 seats. In actual fact, Jason, they don't. They need 4 Labor seats. And if they get 4 Labor seats, plus 3 Katters, plus One Nation, plus Queensland First, they're there. Because Labor's 4, right?
You got a price?
If nothing else.
Have you spoken to your local bookmaker, John, on that?
No, I haven't, because I don't do that. My friend, I barracked for South Sydney. I didn't even have them on Friday night, and I could have made a damn fortune.
you and a few others.
Yes, but you understand what I'm saying. The maths are that. The maths in this election, Jason, are 4. 4 seats from Labor to the LNP, with nothing else changing. You are a kingmaker, right? 1 becomes a kingmaker.
Whoa. Okay. Are you willing to give a prediction?
I don't think, I know Souths will make the grand final, but whether they'll beat the Panthers, I don't know.
Oh, sir, that's gold. I'm not going to cut that either. That's just all right. I'll take that. I'll take that.
I think John, Matt's looking for an answer along the lines of who's going to pull a rabbit out of the political hat.
Oh, rather than the rabbit on the field, you mean?
Yeah. We're not talking about Reggie. We're not talking about Reggie at Redfern, John.
Oh, okay. No, I'll answer it this way, Matt, and say that at the moment I think it's too early to tell. My own view on it right now is that it'll be the person who can make Queenslanders be assured of their health safety. Now, that's of right now, because people are looking at overseas and seeing those cases go up in the United Kingdom and Europe. They look with horror at what is happening in the United States, and secretly they breathe a great sigh of relief, whatever their religion, whatever their colour, that by God, aren't we lucky we live in Australia.
Yes, I meant to that. Look, can I put a question to both of you? And Jason, I'll get your take on it first, and then John's, if I may. And this is the question of a naive outsider, so do pardon my phenomenal ignorance, but I know a lot of my listeners share this, share the lack of experience. There's horse trading. Is that actually going to work?
Well, I'm interested in horse racing more so.
No, the political horse trading. So if you get a scenario along those lines, is this doable?
Well, at the end of the day, people, when they put their hand up for public office, need to stick to their guns. And we're putting our cards on the table. For example, today, and John, I'm not sure if picked up on this, but it got a lot of oxygen in regional media today, notwithstanding what the government has announced in the last 24 hours or so with cops on the beat. and the opposition with their fairy tale plan regarding the Bruce Highway. But the big story in much of regional Queensland today was our policy announcement, John, just to bring you up to date regarding the contentious issue of crocodile culling. And I know you've seen this pop up from time to time. Well, you know, if we do have the balance of power, we want to make sure we have for example, a North Queensland and Far North Queensland solution to a North and Far North Queensland problem. Not Brisbane knows best. So, you know, it's some of this stuff will be, I would have thought, not negotiable. You just can't go to water on some of this stuff. And I don't think we're being unreasonable there. And I'm probably not the only one on the Conservative side who thinks that we need to stick to our principles, stick to our guns. And as Larry Amdor would say, deal or no deal.
Mm. Right.
Well, all I can say to you on that, Jason, is this, that in my experience, I was never part of the negotiations. I didn't have to be, but always when there's a minority government at stake, people sit down and say, look, we'll go with you, but these are the ironclad things we want.
Well said.
And you know, then it's up to you as to which bits are really important to you.
Well, John, I'm going to jump in and ask you this, Matt, if I can indulge just for a moment. John, if you were staring down the barrel of touching the premiership, becoming the premier, and you're involved in these negotiations, and one of them was that the North Queensland crew, whoever that may be, said we want $6 billion in royalties redirected from Treasury over 4 years into North, Far North and Central Queensland, which would be, for the record, 12 times bigger than what Campbell Newman and the LNP served up. If you're in those negotiations, for example, do you think that is a reasonable proposition, quarantining $6 billion over 4 years out of Treasury, redirected into projects that create jobs on the back of COVID-19 in the regions?
Well, certainly that was what the National Party did in Western Australia as their price for being in government in Western Australia. I'm not talking about the quantum. I'm talking about the concept.
The concept, yeah, but the concept is not new, is it?
No, it's not. It's not new at all. In fact, it was a royalties for regions in Western Australia. And the Western Australian National Party used that to parlay themselves into whether it was a coalition or certainly support of the government. I think it was a coalition government from memory.
Yeah.
So those are the types of discussions, Jason, that would happen after the 31st when you looked at the makeup of the parliament.
Exactly. And what we're doing there is nothing new, John. It's a Brendan Grills type move. We've just quantified it, John.
It's nothing new at all. And in fact, you would have to be politically naive on behalf of the people you represent if the price of support of a government wasn't going to help the people you represent. That would have to be extraordinarily naive. It's not corrupt. It is, you've gone to the electorate with a platform.
Yeah.
It's not up to me to comment on whether it's nuts or not. That's up to the people to work that out. However, they would come back to you and say, look, what is it that you need for us to form government? You would then put that proposition to them. Mm. That's no different from what Tony Windsor did, from what Rob Oakeshott did, from what Liz Cunningham did, Peter Wellington. I'm just trying to go back to all the independents over the years. But
Brian Harradine?
Brian Harradine was a past master at it, securing things for Tasmania in support of votes on legislation. And if the net effect was the winner was the people who put him into the parliament, well, that's the democratic representation that goes on.
That's right. And in our case, John, and in our case, Matt, it's the people of North, Far North and Central Queensland. As the leader of North Queensland first, we need to live up to our mantra. And that's one way of delivering for those people.
That's right. And the important thing is go back to your basic maths, and you're right. You don't need 73. One does it. Brian Harradine never led a Brian Harradine party. of hundreds of people, it was one vote.
This is doable. This is doable, and it's doable in the next couple of parliamentary cycles. One of the things, and this is more of a comment, but if anyone wishes to add to it, I'd really welcome to it. One of the things when I'm discussing this, I have a very close relative, unfortunately, and he's really cynical. He's like, "Oh, Matt, this is never going to happen. You're chasing your pies in the skies." And I say,
Where's he live, Matt? Where does he live?
Well, actually, he's a grey nomad now, so he has no fixed place of abode, as I keep reminding him. He's and perhaps because there are the somewheres and the anywheres. He's now an anywhere, although he does identify as coming from Rockhampton. This is doable. This really is doable, isn't it, Jason? And then John, if I can sort of get comments on that.
Well, of course it is doable, and you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to work out the economic clout of central, north, and far north Queensland. You look at the might of the Bowen Basin, the Northwest Minerals Province. Well, for goodness sake, we haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to the Galilee. That's not forgetting our sugar industry, the cattle industry, the tourism industry. Look, as the leader of North Queensland First, I'm not sure if John's across this, but I'm advocating for the resumption of the uranium mining industry in Northwest Queensland. There's no doubt we have the economic base, and if you take in central Queensland the population to do it, you look at the gross regional products of Cairns, Townsville, Mackay, Rockhampton, and go west, the numbers stack up. Sure, it's not as big as perhaps some of the other states, and I'm not going to pick on poor old Tasmania, and their economy, but it does stack up if you take in central Queensland. And if you look at the map that I've advocated, north of the Carnarvon Range, north of the Dawes Range, taking in Gladstone, Rocky, Emerald, Central Highlands and the Coalfields, Barkey, Longreach, Boulia, and all places north through to the Torres Strait, it stacks up. But someone's got to have the gonads to force it to take the issue up, to take the ball up, to use an old rugby league analogy. And I think there is more appetite. This is the more point I'll make tonight. There is greater appetite now for this, perhaps in a generation. I can remember Frank Rossiter. I'm not sure if John Mickel remembers Frank, but he was part of that separatist league for self-government for North Queensland when I was a young journalist with News Corp in the early 1990s. It's probably fired up to unprecedented levels. You've got to go back to that era to see so much fire in the belly from people across the political divide, because they are sick of what I said earlier. Brisbane knows best. I say BS.
Well, gentlemen, we've gone way over, and look, I haven't even touched on a lot of my specific questions, although we have covered off on many of the issues. I feel because I've taken up a lot of time, and I feel like I should start wrapping it up. John, is there any comments that you would like to make as we come into the last 5 or so minutes?
No, what I will say in closing is this: you've got a system of democracy in Australia that we should be proud of. Proud of because of this. Proud of because it's compulsory to participate. Proud of because you do get a free vote. Proud of because you have an independent electoral commission. Proud of because when we put a judge in a court, we don't have to worry about whether or what that judge's opinion on democracy is as they're going through in the United States. We don't have to worry about a leader of a nation coming out and saying it's all going to be fraud. There's going to be no fraud. What there is going to be is early voting. You can vote by mail, and that will be done fairly. You can vote pre-poll. That will be done fairly. You'll have a fair system of elections in Queensland. The only thing I get annoyed about is that we don't try to export that to the United States and show them how it should be done. We've got a system that we should be very proud of. And in spite of the fact that in this state of ours, we've had depressions, we've gone through world wars, another depression, we've always had an election day, and we've always had out of that a fair process. We should be proud of that. And I'd urge all your listeners to make sure that they enrol and they participate, and no matter what their point of view, they make sure that that is heard in the lead up to, or definitely on, the 31st of October.
It reminds me, if I can jump straight in there, I was checking through Hansard, as geeks like me do, and I came across a speech from the 4th of August, 1998. It goes like this. 100 years ago in the 1890s, this state was gripped by economic depression and its society was racked by bitter divisions. Despite these seemingly insurmountable problems, just a few short years later, we created a nation. These challenges today may seem daunting, competing interests difficult to reconcile. The sense of social unity and sense of fair go may seem frayed. The solutions then, as now, were not immediately obvious. There's a couple of sentences that I'll skip. Our nation and our state deserve better than that. We owe it to the people who put us here to canvass forthrightly the great issues of the day. In this way, Parliament can be a source of strength, a place in which the great suite of ideas, ambitions and intentions that abound in the wider community can be debated. That is the true role of Parliament. Stirring words, I must say, when I read them.
Where they come from, Matt?
And 22 years later, I still agree with them.
That's from Mr. Mickel's maiden speech to Parliament. And I got to say, I'm not being ironic or flippant, sir. They were stirring words, sir. I was genuinely moved when I read that. And I'm going to wrap up on this point. There are disagreements on the way forward. There are disagreements in regards to policy. Indeed, it appears to me that there are even disagreements in regards to the best structure of the way forward. But there is no disagreement that this is fundamentally about democracy. And the way I see it, a new state is about, and I've articulated this on my other interviews, it's really about democracy. Because if democracy isn't participative and people don't feel like they have a voice, it becomes meaningless. And that's when you do get revolution. That's when you do get the sorts of things that we're seeing in the United States now. So the more you ensure that people do have a voice, the more you ensure that the regions are heard, that people are not dismissed as fools and rednecks, that's what's going to bulwark democracy. So look, sir, thank you very much for coming. Jason, as usual, thank you very much for coming. I am sorry about the tech issues at the beginning. They were disproportionately my fault, not completely, but disproportionately. I thank you both very much for your time and your perspective. Sincerely valued. And Facebook's well, not quite going nuts, but there's quite a bit of discussion that we've created, and I can say with some degree of confidence this is going to be a popular interview once we get it through. That, I do ask you to we'll forward it to you both, Jason and John, if you wouldn't mind putting it through your networks as well, because I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed this conversation and I've really enjoyed your perspectives. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. Good on you, Matt.
Okay, well, I'll just get you to stay.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
I'll just get you to both stay for just a couple of moments and I'm going to stop the live stream now.